Howdy, folks. This is just a reminder that if you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and especially by subscribing. And be sure to hit the bell notification so you always get notified whenever I have a new video. Hope you enjoy this.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks so much for being here. We've got 2 hours of open forum with Jimmy Akin for you today. But it's an internet open forum. Lots of questions from the internet for Jimmy. So hang on. Dial on a different day. Not a day to dial, but a day to enjoy the questions we've gathered up from the internet. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And I have a feeling one of the questions today comes from someone who's associated with Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. I am not sure about that. But first of all, Jimmy, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Do you know what's dropping this week on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on Friday?
This pre-record we're doing is coming out on June 11th. Is that right?
That is correct. So I guess the 14th?
So the 14th is going to be part one of a two-part look at unicorns. And there is a lot more to say about unicorns than you might imagine. And there are real unicorns. So this is not just a fantasy thing. There are actual real unicorns. And in fact, there are several different types of actual real unicorns. So we're going to tell you all about them.
The Unicorn Show. It's a two-parter starting on Friday. I mean, come on. I wish this was a Thursday show, so I wouldn't have to wait several days for the unicorns. I mean, that's a heck of a tease for a 3-day wait. On Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, you are not alone. You have
true
a co-host.
There's 8 billion people on this mysterious world.
Well, that's true. Yes, but on the podcast Mysterious World. Mm-hmm. And I see the name Bettinelli here.
Yeah, so Dom Bettinelli is the co-host, and his wife, Melanie, does some reading for the show occasionally, as does one of his daughters. And so our first question comes from Melanie Bettinelli.
All right, so Melanie said this, the Bettinelli children have a couple questions. One, if there are conjoined twins who are saints, and they have the power of bilocation, would they be able to bilocate separately, or should they bilocate together?
Well, it's going to depend in part on the nature of bilocation, whether bilocation is a mental phenomenon or a physical phenomenon. And there are Catholic theologians who have gone both ways on that. Some have proposed that you can be physically present in multiple places at one time. Others have said, no, you really can't. This needs to be some kind of vision or something. And we actually did an episode of Mysterious World on bilocation where we talked about Padre Pio and his bilocations and other bilocations. And at least in Padre Pio's case, it looks more like he was having that these were telepathic or visionary experiences. And that's known from other areas in parapsychology. There are a lot of reports of bilocation that are telepathic in nature, where you're having a perspective outside of your body and you're in another location and other people perceive you in that location, even though you're not physically there. And in fact, I know someone that's happened to. It would happen to him when he'd get really bored. And he was at a party once and he was really bored and he was thinking about a friend of his, and all of a sudden he perceives himself in his friend's home. And this is like crazy late at night, and he sees his friend and her daughter there, and they see him and they talk to him and he talks to them. And the next day he calls her up, and before he can say anything, she said, I was wondering when you were going to call. And she had the same experience. She'd seen him the previous night. Yeah. And that actually happened a couple times with him. So if bilocation is being performed in a particular instance mentally rather than physically, then there's no reason in principle. I mean, conjoined twins have different minds. And so the mind of one twin could mentally bilocate somewhere else, and the other twin wouldn't have to do anything. So it might come across as here's just this one twin. He doesn't appear conjoined. On the other hand, because people tend to represent, they think of themselves a certain way, And this comes up, for example, in a lot of ghost encounters, the deceased and spontaneous after-death communications, where someone's loved one dies and then they make contact with them spontaneously, and oftentimes they will appear younger than they were when they died, based on their self-image. Because they don't have a physical body anymore. So whatever they're projecting is their self-image. And sometimes they change their self-image, but it's all, people often think of themselves as younger than they really physically appeared. And so you'll have appearances of departed loved ones where they look young and healthy and stuff like that compared to how they were when they died. And so since a conjoined twin is gonna have this pretty tight self-image with the other twin that they're conjoined to.
Oh yeah.
Even if they're mentally projecting, you may get a self-image of both of them there. If and similarly, if bilocation is happening in a physical way where their body is physically present in a second location, so they're multi-locating, it could happen that you would see both of them there because they have effectively one physical body, or bizarrely, you might see just the part of their body that belongs to them, and or both twins could be having the bilocation experience at the same time. They could both be mentally projecting themselves somewhere, or both physically present somewhere by a miracle. So it's really going to depend on what kind of bilocation is happening, who's doing it, and what God wants to happen. There's no single unitary answer to this.
All right, Bettinelli children.
But if folks want to hear that episode on bilocation, it's episode 212. So you can go to mysterious.fm/212.
The Bettinelli children have another question, and that is, will conjoined twins be joined in their resurrected bodies?
Well, we're not told the answer to this. The general opinion is that in the resurrection, we will not suffer from the physical defects we had in this life. And so we won't be hindered by extreme young age or extreme old age or things like that. But exactly what the status is of physical conditions like being conjoined is not clear. Now, it's obviously possible for God to separate conjoined twins in a safe way and give them both perfect, independent resurrection bodies, and that may be what happens. On the other hand, they may prefer to remain conjoined because they've been together their whole lives. That's natural to them, and so they might voluntarily be conjoined. Also, if you notice, after Jesus is resurrected, he still has the wounds on his hands and his sides, which he let Thomas examine. And so he wasn't harmed by those wounds. He was no longer dead. He wasn't still bleeding from them. But he still had them. And that would suggest that he was at least capable of displaying conditions he had during life. He may not have always displayed them. He may not always have the wounds visible, but he's capable of having them be visible, and we're told we're going to be like Jesus, and so it would be possible for conjoined twins to continue to manifest as conjoined in the resurrection, even if they're not always conjoined in the resurrection.
Bettinelli twins, you sound like
children.
Excuse twins. I don't know why. Well, I do know why I said twins. It was in my mind. Bettinelli children, you sound like good connoisseurs of Jimmy Akin's mysterious world. Thank you for the questions. I think that'll take us right to the break. We'll take a very quick break and be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
He is honored by the Church as a saint and theologian with the title of Universal Doctor.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Albert the Great was a Dominican theologian, scientist, and teacher of whom it was said that he knew the sum total of human knowledge in his time. He also helped shape the even more brilliant St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor. Albert died in 1280 and was named a Doctor of the Church in 1931.
To find out more, visit EWTN.com and click on Catholicism.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's so nice to get to spend 2 hours with Jimmy Akin doing an internet open forum, all kinds of interesting questions to come. Before we move on to the next question, we'll invite you once again to our annual conference, September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from me. The parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. What a great topic, and that we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that. Check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com, CatholicAnswersConference.com. Jimmy, this next one comes from John. Mm-hmm. In marriage, is the, quote, good of the spouses supplied by nature or grace?
Okay, so marriage comes in two forms, natural marriage and sacramental marriage. And these are discussed in Canon 1055 of the Code of Canon Law, which is also quoted in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where it's paragraph 1601, if you want to look it up. But here's what it says. First, it's going to talk about natural marriage, and then it's going to talk about sacramental marriage. About natural marriage, it says the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life is, by its nature, ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. So right there, the good of the spouses is included as one of the aims of any marriage. So that's natural marriage. And then also sacramental marriage, which is an elevated form of marriage, but the good of the spouses is right there in the basic off-the-shelf non-upgrade form of marriage. So good of the spouses is part of the goal under natural marriage. Then the canon says this covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. So if you're both baptized, your marriage is automatically sacramental. So it has all of the previous elements, including good of the spouses, but it's been elevated by grace because it's a sacrament. And so that grace that's added by the sacrament is meant to help us live marriage better in Christ. And that means you're going to get extra grace to help with the good of the spouses. But the good of the spouses is right there in basic natural marriage.
All right, John, thank you very much for the question. Charbel wants to know this, Jimmy. What's the church's stance on the history of St. Veronica?
Well, the church doesn't have a doctrine on this, so we have to fall back on history. And there, are these stories about St. Veronica, who, for people who may not be familiar, she was an alleged eyewitness of the Passion of our Lord and wiped his face with a cloth as he was on the road to Calvary, and reportedly the image of his face became impressed on that cloth. And so in light of this miraculous report, people regarded Veronica as a saint, and so that's the basic story. But how well is it documented? Well, she's not in the Gospels. Do we have records of her in the Apostolic Fathers, in the earliest church fathers? Yeah, no, we don't. We start to see elements of the Veronica story appear in the 400s. But the full Veronica story really doesn't come together until the Middle Ages. So this does not appear to be a genuine historical story. It's too late. We don't have, we can't trace it all the way back to early reliable sources. So it doesn't look like it's historical. Some people have wondered about where the name Veronica comes from, and there are sort of two proposals. One is that the name Veronica is derived from the Greek name Berenike. Berenike we bring into English as Bernice, but in Greek you pronounce it Berenike, and it was a common name. There were, in kind of the last dynasty in Egypt, which was the Greek pharaohs. They weren't actually Egyptian; they were Greeks. Cleopatra was one of these, and all of the Ptolemies were from the Greek pharaohs. And there's an easy way to remember the names of the people in this dynasty. They're called the Ptolemaic dynasty because all of them were named Ptolemy. So if you're
like
asking
George Foreman's family,
it's like George Foreman's family. And the women were all either named Cleopatra or Berenike.
Oh.
And Berenike was used in other cultures too. Just like here in America, we have names that have roots in other languages besides English. And like, for example, Herod Agrippa's, he was king. He was the Jewish king who helped put Emperor Claudius on the throne and also killed James, son of Zebedee. And his wife was named Berenike. So some people have thought, okay, if you look at the consonants, b and v are both bilabial consonants. Mm-hmm. And so that B on Berenike, if you activate, if you pronounce it with friction, it becomes v. And so Berenike could become Veronica. So that's one theory where the name comes from. But there's another theory that it's derived from Vera Icon. So you can hear how Veronica sounds like Vera Icon, and you just put a feminine ending on that, Vera Icone, Veronica. And Vera Icon would mean true image. And so the idea here is people had an image of Christ on cloth that was regarded as the true image of Christ, and that gave rise to the legend of St. Veronica capturing the true image of Christ on this cloth. And that cloth may have been the Shroud of Turin, or it may have been some other representation of Christ on cloth. But that's a possible origin story for the legend of St. Veronica, that it's based on a physical image of Christ on cloth that then you got this explanation of, well, how did the image get there? Oh, there was this woman named True Image or Veronica who wiped his face with a cloth and got his picture.
Charbel, thank you for the question. It's an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and Trey asked this. Can God forgive you your sins? Or could it be more accurate to say he is the immutable embodiment of forgiveness itself? Thus, really only we can change by atoning and reorienting ourselves to him.
Well, the Catechism of the Catholic Church has an interesting passage that might shed some light on this. It's actually discussing the reason that demons can't get saved. And it says that it's not because of a limitation in divine mercy. God would be willing to forgive them, but they don't want to repent. They're not willing to repent and accept God's forgiveness. And so it seems to me, and so you could look at that and say, well, it's kind of like God's always willing to forgive. He doesn't need to make a special decision to forgive in your case. You just need to meet the requirements of forgiveness. And so it seems to me that the way Trey has explained this as God is an immutable embodiment of forgiveness, and what really needs to happen is not for God to do something special to forgive you, but for you to do something to orient yourself to God's forgiveness by repenting. And it seems to me that that would be a permitted way to articulate this. However, it also would not exclude a positive act of forgiveness on God's part. So I think you can look at it more than one way, but it seems to me that the way Trey has proposed would be permitted.
All right, Trey, thank you very much for that question. We're moving right along, and Marie has this. Marie's son, Joshua, wants to ask you if you think the Superman movies could have a Christian allegory to them.
Oh, yeah. there have been religious allegories woven in to the Superman stories over time. A big example of this comes from the year 1992 when DC Comics temporarily killed Superman, and he had this sacrificial death to save Metropolis from a horrendous monster named Doomsday that was going to kill everybody. And Doomsday and Superman fought Doomsday. And notice also Doomsday, religious theme, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Apocalypse.
So Superman fights Doomsday to a draw, and they end up killing each other. But Superman's sacrificial death saves everybody. And then a few months later, Superman rises from the dead. So, sacrificial death to save people, followed by resurrection. That's a clear Christological metaphor or allegory that's being used in this story. And sometimes they've even depicted Superman on a cross, like in the Smallville TV show. So there have been Christological parallels, but not only Christological parallels, because let's think about Superman for a minute. He's the last son of Krypton. He was a little baby, and everyone died, and he escaped. His parents put him in a rocket ship that took him through space to a place of safety, and then he became a great savior and saved lots of people. Can you think of anyone in the Bible, Si, who, as a little baby, was in danger of death and got put in something and then got taken to safety and became a great savior for his people?
Yeah, that does sound like Moses getting put in a basket and sent down a river.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, and it so happens that Superman's Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were Jewish. And it has often been pointed out that it looks like they're recapitulating the story of Moses in the story of Superman.
All right. What a great question, Joshua. Thank you very much for that. Sometimes it seems like these people create these characters, but they never really benefit much from them themselves. Did these guys, did they make money off of Superman, or was this one of those?
Unfortunately, at the time, the comics were all work for hire. So they didn't have the kind of creator rights that comic book creators do today. And so for years, Siegel and Shuster, they continued to write stories, and they made money from those, but they weren't getting rich, despite the enormous popularity of the character. And by the time the Christopher Reeve Superman movie came out in the late 1970s, they were kind of basically, impoverished in New York. And that came to the attention when the Superman movie came out. That came to public attention, and DC started to make special arrangements for them to pay them better. Even though they were no longer active, they were now getting better royalties and stuff like that. But there have been legal disputes between their estates, because they both passed on now. There have been legal disputes between their estates and DC Comics that have forced some changes at DC Comics in case they lose the rights to them. But it looks like they've got all that worked out now to where the families are happy and DC is happy, and so it looks like they're good to go for at least until Superman becomes public domain in a few years.
Isn't that funny? Like that. What is it? Mickey Mouse became public domain recently, and he got an extension. The Congress gave him some kind of the Mickey Mouse extension.
Well, that was years ago, and that's now expired.
Yeah.
So Mickey Mouse is now public domain, but you can only use the original Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse. And in the same way, when Superman becomes public domain, you'll be able to use the original Siegel and Shuster one from the 1930s, but you won't be able to tell modern Superman stories.
Yeah. I have to say, Jimmy, I think that I wasn't very supportive of that extension of Mickey Mouse's
No, it was a cash grab by Disney, and Sonny Bono and the Congress went along with it. And it delayed, the whole point of copyright protection is to encourage people to be creative and make stuff that is helpful to the culture that can then become public domain and enrich the culture.
Yeah.
And because if you didn't have a copyright for a period, you couldn't make money on it because everyone would immediately copy a good idea. But if you have a forever copyright on it, then it doesn't enrich the culture because you can just sit on it. And so the whole point is to enrich culture by letting things fall into the public domain. And Disney just had an enormous cash grab. That Congress went along with by extending it. They never should have done that. The original copyright term was like 14 years. The idea is, you make your money in your first 14 years, and then it becomes public domain. And they've progressively extended that to ridiculous lengths now, to where you have to wait almost a century for stuff to become public domain.
Yeah, and everyone who created it or had any part in its creation is long gone. They either benefited or didn't, depending on how they managed it.
Yeah,
and it's just corporate property. It's really just kind of favoring corporations over the whole community of people who might want to create stuff with it. All right, well, we got to take a very quick break. We will be back with more Internet Open Forum for Jimmy Akin. Lots of great questions from the Internet to come on Catholic Answers Live.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Are you scared to talk about abortion? Don't worry, almost everyone is. You can overcome this fear as Trent Horn shows in the newly revised and expanded second edition of Persuasive Pro-Life. With a little knowledge and a few proven techniques, you can become a bold and effective apologist for life. Visit shop.catholic.com to order your copy of Persuasive Pro-Life and never again be afraid to speak up. Also available at good Catholic bookstores. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm a little dizzy from that camera work. Wow. That was quite impressive, Zach. I don't know if you caught that, Jimmy, but I
didn't see it.
It was wild. Welcome back. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin's our guest this hour and next. It's an Internet Open Forum. That was like some kind of weird 1970s filmmaking you were doing there. All the questions have come from the internet, and Jimmy's got answers for them. At least we hope he does. This one comes from Noah. How and why did the Jews become monotheists?
Well, because God revealed that truth to them. Now, that doesn't mean they understood it fully or all of them accepted it. In fact, one of the things that happens repeatedly in the Old Testament is the prophets are railing on people for worshiping gods in addition to Yahweh. And we also have to be a bit careful about how we understand monotheism, because it doesn't mean that there is, it can mean there is only one spiritual being up there, who's the infinite creator of everything. But that is not how the Jewish faith or the Christian faith understands things. Yes, there is only one infinite spiritual being up there, and that's God. But there are also finite spiritual beings up there, and in Christianity we call them angels. But they're finite spiritual beings, and other people would call them gods. And so you have to be a little careful about the definition of monotheism and whether you're using it to refer exclusively to a single infinite being, or whether you're using it more broadly than that, whether you're using the term God more broadly than that. One of the things that was not necessarily clear for a lot of time in Israel's history, they knew their God was the creator. They knew he was the supreme God, but they didn't necessarily disbelieve that there were other gods in the sense of lesser spiritual beings. And so there's a question of, do you call that monotheism or do you give another term to it? One of the terms that's sometimes used is henotheism. Hen is one of the Greek words for monos means alone. So monotheism is there's one God alone. But henotheism, which is like, it means one Godism, but the idea is you worship one God. Doesn't mean there aren't other ones. And so there were, people in other cultures who would say, like, yeah, I worship my personal God, whoever that is, but that doesn't mean there aren't other gods. And so this was actually a common viewpoint in ancient Israel. And that's part of why people were so tempted to worship like Baal and, people like that. It's because they didn't disbelieve in these other gods. They just knew, okay, Israel's God, that's Yahweh, but we can worship this other popular God too. Mm-hmm. And eventually, the prophets and the authors of the Bible gave pushback on this. So, for example, around 1000 BC, the author of Deuteronomy says that the gods of the nations, he doesn't deny that they exist, but he says that they're shadim. Now, shed is the Hebrew word for demon. And so shadim means demons. And so what the author of Deuteronomy is trying to make clear is he's not saying these gods that other nations have, like Baal, are not real. He's trying to say that they are demons. They're not worth worshiping. And this is something the prophets do too. So the idea of monotheism, it's more complex. There are more versions of monotheism than you might think. And exactly which version of monotheism is true is something that developed in the consciousness of Israel over time, as God gave them progressive revelation.
All right. Noah, thank you very much. Thank you for that question. This one comes from Maureen. Where did the prayer come from that we say at Mass after the Our Father, for thine is the kingdom, etc.?
Well, it basically, so this is said after the Lord's Prayer in Catholic services. In Protestant services, it's often considered part of the Lord's Prayer. But there's been a recognition, even among Protestant scholars these days, that it doesn't seem to have been part of the original version of the Lord's Prayer. You don't find it in the older Bible manuscripts, in the better manuscripts of Matthew, which it's Matthew's version of the Lord's Prayer that we use in church. And Luke also has a version, but it's a little different, and we don't use it. So as manuscript science has progressed, it's been realized, this little add-on for yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, this final doxology or final praise of God, is not part of the original. So where did it come from? Well, it came from the liturgy. And it's very early in the liturgy. If you look at a document called the Didache, which was written in the 1st century alongside the books of the New Testament, at the end of its version of the Lord's Prayer, it has, for yours is the power and the glory forever. So even in the 1st century, in the liturgy, some people were saying a variation on this phrase, and it was likely taken from earlier Jewish sources. For example, if you look at 1 Chronicles 29, verses 11 and 12, David is praying in front of the assembly of the Israelites, and he says, yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in heaven and in earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted above all. So that sounds like another variation of, for yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. It's just a little more elaborated. So before the liturgy had this phrase, it was variations on it were already present in Jewish literature, including the book of First Chronicles. So it looks like it ultimately has roots in Old Testament prayers, and then it gets modified and used in the Christian liturgy, and then eventually it became so intertwined with the Lord's Prayer that some people thought it was part of it, and they would even write it in Bible manuscripts of Matthew. But now that manuscript science has progressed and we've looked back at older, better versions of Matthew, it's not there, and it's made clear this really entered Christian usage through the liturgy.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Maureen. We got time for another one before we have to take a break. Moving right through the internet open forum questions. Jimmy Aiken, our guest. Lydia asks this: why do you suppose the account of Peter walking on the water is only in Matthew?
Well, because the evangelists had to make choices. As I've mentioned quite a number of times, there was books in the ancient world were fantastically expensive. Not only was every book handwritten, so you had to pay a scribe to write the copy for you, but every piece of paper that he wrote on had to be handmade. They didn't have paper mills to, churn out reams of paper the way we do. They had to make every single page individually by hand. And so a single copy of the Gospel of Matthew would cost more than the equivalent of $2,000. And that means that there was, in order to let anybody afford a book, only the rich could afford them, or things like churches or monasteries where people could pool their resources to be able to afford them. But there was enormous price pressure to keep them short. And so all the Gospels are under the length of a single scroll. Now, Matthew is the second longest of the Gospels, so he's already getting long. Luke is even longer, but Matthew is the second longest of the Gospels. So he's got to make choices about what he's going to include. The others, like Luke, had to make choices about what they were going to include. And so that's why we don't find all of the stories about Jesus in all of the Gospels, including the one where Jesus interacts with Peter walking on the water. Well, presumably what happened then is when Matthew wrote his Gospel, and personally I think he wrote third. I think Mark wrote first, then Luke, and then Matthew. Matthew looked at Mark and Luke and said, well, I know about this extra story about Peter that's not in these, so I think I'll include that. And that is in line with the fact Matthew has several stories about Peter that are not in Mark and Luke. So Matthew has a special interest in Peter. So he has an interest in Peter and telling stories about Peter, and he noticed this one is not already recorded, so I'm going to record it.
All right. Lydia, thank you very much for the question. I think that's the perfect time to take a break. We'll take a very quick break and be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Aiken on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is A Reason for Hope. It explores the Catholic faith and the teachings of St. John Paul II in a way that's fun, relevant, and engaging. You can hear A Reason for Hope and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place, all free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we're doing an internet open forum today. Lots and lots of questions come to us via the various ways the internet can communicate them to you. And this one comes from Les. Les says, first of all, this is a story, and I really enjoyed reading this story, Les. Mm-hmm. My daughter has a turtle. Mm-hmm. One day, she was laying on the floor with the turtle. The turtle looks at her, then at a piece of fence about a foot or two tall, and back at her a few times. The turtle then runs to the fence, pushes it over to create a ramp, an inclined plane, onto my daughter, then climbs the fence onto my daughter's back. That would appear to be a lot of thought going on in the turtle's brain to figure that out. What evidence do we have for the extent of intelligence in animals? Does she just have a really smart turtle?
Well, we have considerable evidence for animal intelligence. How much intelligence an animal has will vary depending on the species of the animal. Some are obviously smarter than others. I used to have turtles myself when I was a boy, and I'd keep them in a shed, and I'd come out and feed them, like lettuce and things like that. And they got to the point where they knew their food would come from my hands. And so what they would do, turtles got those little beaks. Yeah. They would take their beak and they would nip my finger, not hard. They're not trying to hurt me, but to prompt me to get the food, they would nip at my finger. And so they had figured out, okay, we want the food that comes from the hand, so let's stimulate the hand with something connected with eating, and maybe he'll get us some food. And I would. So turtles do have, some intelligence. Recently, I was taking a class discussing creativity in psychology, and the instructor showed a photograph of a cat that had found a way to get a drink from the automatic water dispenser that's high up on a fridge, above where the cat could reach. And what the cat did was he got the family dog to stand in front of the fridge, and then the cat leaped up on the back of the dog, and that allowed the cat to stretch up and press the lever to get a drink of water out of the automatic water dispenser. Now, how the cat got the dog to stand there, I don't know, but this was significant intelligence on the cat's part to figure out how to do this. My sister has a dog, which is a miniature Australian Shepherd named Luna, and miniature Australian Shepherds are considered very smart dogs. And I occasionally watch the dog for my sister, like when she's on a trip or something, and I've been able to teach Luna several new skills. For example, one of them, I got a recordable dog button, and I recorded the word outside on the dog button. And I then taught Luna how to use the outside button when she wants to go outside. And so I can be here working in my office, and I'll hear outside come from the other room, and I know to go and let Luna outside. Now, Luna's still in the process of learning. Just because she gets to go outside doesn't mean I'm coming out to play with her, because I've got work to do. But she can now communicate to me the fact she wants to go outside even when I'm not present. Also, I can see Luna working through creatively how to get rewards. Because, when you're teaching a dog a skill, you give it a reward as part of it. And Luna is very motivated for rewards. So I was teaching her to play fetch with a little squeaky toy. And so I would squeak the toy and then throw it back in my yard, and she would run and bound and get the squeaky toy, and she's squeaking it all the way back. And then the deal is, for this trick, I put my right hand down, she drops the ball in my right hand, and then I give her a treat with my left hand. Uh-huh. Well, okay, so she's got the basic concept, but she's often so excited that she doesn't get the ball to stay in my hand. Either she drops it too early before she gets to my hand, or she drops it in such a way it just bounces off my hand. So what she's working on learning now is how to get it there successfully, because I won't give her the treat until she successfully gets it in my hand, because that's what I want her to do. And you give the reward for doing what you want them to do. So she's working on that, but she's not quite there yet. And I see how her mind is working to get the reward when she fails. So sometimes she will miss my hand with the squeaky toy, and I will point at it. And she's not sure, am I supposed to pick that up and try again? Or am I supposed to do something else? And she'll try other ways to earn the reward. Like she'll put her paw in my hand for the shake skill.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm wanting. And I point at the squeaky toy again. And if she gets confused, she tried to put it in my hand and it didn't work. She tried shake and that didn't work. So she lays down on the ground and rolls over.
Oh yeah.
For the rollover trick.
Let me try this.
Let me try this. So eventually I get her to put it in my hand and then I give her the treat. But I can see how she's creatively problem solving to get that reward.
Right.
Of, well, okay, I tried that and it didn't work. And so I'll try this and then I'll try this. And so she's using process of elimination to try to figure out how to get me to give her the reward, which shows intelligence on her part. So we have considerable evidence for animal intelligence.
Thank you for the question. That does sound like you have a smart turtle. Jason wants to know this. What's your take on original monotheism?
So original monotheism is an idea that was proposed by the Scottish anthropologist Andrew Lang in 1898. Now, at the time, there were views that you could call original animism and original polytheism, where the idea is that, especially original animism, where people thought nature was kind of suffused with spirits, and then monotheism developed gradually, where you realize there must be one great spirit behind it all. And so this was what's known as an evolutionary theory of the development of religious thought. Well, Lang proposed it went the other way around. Lang proposed that originally humans in tribal societies worshipped one god, and then they later degenerated by adding other gods to the worship of one god. Also, as we mentioned in discussing a previous question, you've got that exactly what is monotheism question. Are you denying the existence of other spirits, or are you okay with other lesser spirits existing besides the one God? Like we mentioned henotheism, for example. Well, so that's kind of what the concept of original monotheism is, that originally in tribal societies, people worshipped one creator god, and then that degenerated into polytheism. Okay, that was proposed in 1898, and it had some defenders in the early 20th century, but by the mid-20th century, anthropology had kind of moved on from both the original monotheism and original animism / polytheism. They'd moved away from evolutionary and de-evolutionary theories because we just didn't have good evidence that everybody in tribal societies were monotheists, or everyone in tribal societies were polytheists. And these days, anthropologists tend to see different religious models, both animism, polytheism, and monotheism, coexisting in different societies as far back in history as we can look. So today, anthropologists typically don't support any of these theories. You really have to ask about a particular group. Now, we can only go back so far, though, because recorded history only begins with the invention of writing about 3000 BC. Mm-hmm. And so before that, we just don't have enough data about what people believe. We can ask modern tribes what they believe, and we can look at writings that tell us what ancient peoples believed, but it's not unanimous one way or another. Ultimately, if you wanted to know what the first humans believed, you could, if you had a time machine, you could maybe go back and ask Adam and Eve what they thought. But even with them, it's going to depend on how you define your terms, because they may have known about the one God, but they may also have known about angels, and they may have used the same word for both God and angels. You got the big guy and then you got the little guys. So whether you'd call them monotheists or not is going to depend on how you're using the term God and how a given group of humans is applying it to creatures in the spiritual, or to entities in the spiritual world.
All right. Well, thanks very much for the question, Jason. That was from Jason. Appreciate that. I'm going to keep going and get some more in before we have to go. Timothy asked this, will we continue learning in heaven, or will we just instantaneously know everything we can know?
Well, we will continue to have conscious experiences in the afterlife, and we will remember those experiences. So, like, for example, let's say you need to be purified before you get to heaven, and then you get resurrected. Well, those are events that happen. You'll remember, oh yeah, and then I got purified, and you'll remember, oh, and then I got resurrected. And then we're told we're going to reign with Christ forever, and reigning involves doing stuff. So we will continue to have new experiences, and we'll remember those experiences, and remembering experiences is a form of learning. So I would say that we will continue to learn. But what about this idea that Tim mentions about instantly knowing answers to questions? Well, that is reported in some near-death experiences. There are some near-death experiencers who say, as soon as I could formulate a question in my mind, I knew the answer. Well, it seems to me, kind of like they just downloaded the information from somewhere. Well, it seems to me that instantly downloading new information is a form of learning. It's just a more rapid and more efficient form of learning than what we do in this life. So if it's true that we're able to learn the answer to a question just by formulating it, then it would seem to me that would be another kind of learning that we would be doing in the afterlife, in addition to learning about all the new experiences we're having. So I think we will continue to learn, but it may be way easier and better than it is now.
Everything there is going to be better.
Yeah.
I feel like. Tom wants to know this. Did Jesus drink wine, or was it just grape juice? If Jesus submitted his DNA to 23andMe, okay, I see. These are two separate questions.
Two separate questions.
All right, we'll start with the wine or grape juice question.
Okay, so we have a couple pieces of data here. The first one is from John chapter 2, where Jesus miraculously produces wine to keep a wedding party going. And wedding parties in the ancient world, they could last like 7 days and stuff. So you could need a lot of food and a lot of wine for them. And these people had run out, and so Jesus miraculously produces more wine. And the major domo, who's in charge of the event, tastes the wine and says, this is the good stuff. Normally, what'll happen at an event like this is they'll bring out the good wine first, and then when people lose their taste on the good wine, they'll bring out the cheap stuff. Well, that tells us the good wine is alcoholic, because you don't lose your taste by drinking grape juice. And you need alcohol in it in order to lose your taste. And so since he identifies this wine as the good stuff, that would tell us this wine is alcoholic. Also, later, elsewhere in the Gospels, Jesus notes that some people are saying, well, John came with fasting, but Jesus is a drunkard and a glutton. Well, if he had a reputation for drinking grape juice that was non-alcoholic, he wouldn't have a reputation. People wouldn't accuse him of being a drunkard. Mm-hmm. So that's another piece of evidence, as well as just the fact that in Greek, oinos, it means wine. I mean, yeah, maybe sometimes it can refer to non-alcoholic wine, but that's not the normal usage. The normal uses of oinos is alcoholic wine.
Tom, thank you very much. Let's get to the second one then that Tom had. If Jesus submitted his DNA to 23andMe, would it prove that Joseph was his father?
Well, the only way that Joseph was not Jesus' human father. And so the only way that Joseph would show up as Jesus' father on a DNA test would be if God chose to create a male germ cell that had an identical copy of Joseph's DNA in it. However, if he chose to do that, it would generate confusion about the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. That's the whole point of the virgin birth. This guy has no human father, so he's the Son of God. And I doubt that God would do that. It would be rather foolish for one would assume it could be rather foolish for God to create Joseph's DNA in the germ cell that was used to conceive Jesus.
All right, Tom, thank you for the question. Lots more questions to come. Jimmy Akin is our guest. If you want to know about unicorns, this week, a two-parter starts, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World about unicorns. And there are unicorns. So check it out. It's mysterious.fm. But we're coming back with more internet questions, and there's a lot of them. And we've got Jimmy for another hour. So hang on for more Internet Open Forum to continue right after this.
And before we go, just one more reminder that if you like what you've watched, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and especially by subscribing. I'm trying to grow my channel, and I'd really appreciate your help. Thank you, and God bless you.